It looks like Napster is in trouble. Real Networks, which holds an 84% stake in Napster, has published its quarterly financial results. Napster's subscription revenues grew from $24.3 million in the first quarter of 2019 to $26.3 million in the first quarter of 2020, an 8.2% increase, though pales in comparison to its competitors. They also have cut down its operating losses in Q1 of 2020, but they're saying they need outside funding within the next 12 months to survive. Let's turn to Sam Toll with his latest take on this. Sam, how's everything in LA?
Everything's great. It's been really nice now that I think it's week 9 for me since the beginning of offices getting closed. But things getting into normal. The news kind of seems like it's back in cycle, and we're dwelling less on things like, how does this affect concerts, and more about like, okay, what's happening in the actual business? Let's actually get some work done.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about the effect on Live Nation in a moment. But let's take a look at this, where we're talking about Napster, which was at one point the bane of existence for the music industry, and well, even Lars Ulrich has finally gotten he was at Sean Parker's wedding. So we started getting along.
How the tables turn. I mean, it is very fascinating to think about the position that Napster once held, especially among the recording business and the folks who were like so adamantly trying to defend against a sort of a digital future that at a certain point seemed inevitable. And now here we are, where streaming revenues are through the roof across the board. And we look at somebody like Napster, where I don't know what necessarily happened, if it was the multiple changes of hands, whether it's like Comcast and Real Networks and, Rhapsody and the rebranding and the consolidations, but they just haven't been able to compete with the aggressive growth of other platforms. And I think this might be the end of the road.
It certainly is a challenge. And one of the things with live streaming with any of these companies has always been that, and you go back to Pandora years ago, and when you look at Pandora, it's like 65% of their operating costs went to licensing of music.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, it's like you now have your staff, you now have your marketing, you have everything else. And so you only have a 35% operating budget for that.
Right. Well, and that's true for Spotify as well, where, I mean, even more than that, they're largely regarded as having spent 70% goes to rights owners, and that's their top line advertised figure. But it really ends up, if you look at their costs and the way that they've reported out, especially as they're running up to their direct listing on the stock market, that it was more like 80% plus. And a lot of that has to do with minimums that are owed to the labels and publishers. And I would assume that Napster, aka Real Networks, has some of that going on as well, a certain amount of minimum payments, minimum guarantees. That's pretty frequent. And it's sort of, you try to make that up through usage on the platform. But I mean, the thing that I didn't really realize until somewhat recently was that Napster is, aside from just being an actual consumer-facing streaming platform, they do a lot of white label B2B sales, in the sense that they're powering the streaming platforms for things like iHeartMedia and other websites and systems that want to have a music streaming application built into their suite of services, but they're not going to spend the time and money to research, develop, and license all that content on their own. It becomes sort of a streaming plugin. I would have thought that business is more robust than it seems to be. That seems like a really good driver of revenue that doesn't require a whole lot of extra cost to accomplish, because it's just a lot of front end and not a lot of back end that's already been done in terms of licensing. But maybe there are cost structures in there that don't scale well that I'm not aware of.
Well, it's interesting to know. One of the things that I also saw recently was Daniel Ek was talking on, and there was a reference to, he made a comment similar to YouTube 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying if they can be more of a radio, put more into radio and tap into that $18 billion market from radio. And now that can help drive Spotify and get more money to the creators, which, it's like, that's what YouTube said 4 or 5 years ago. So
Well,
now it's
we've tried that already.
yeah.
Like Spotify tried that already. Spotify turned off its radio features really largely in favor of this is artist playlists, and now this is written by songwriter type playlists, which I think are fantastic. But like you don't have a continuous artist radio anymore. You have a limited sort of like summary overview kind of playlist, and then you can have your daily mix, which I guess is radio, but it's not different really. It's not radio in the sense of like Sirius or even in the sense of like Pandora, where it's non-interactive streaming.
And that's the thing. There's the going back to my earlier comments is like interactive, non-interactive, on demand. There are so many complexities
Right.
in the licensing, different rates, different legalities. It's just, it's an archaic copyright system that's been trying to be fixed. But anytime something gets passed, that's already 20 years behind.
Well, and I want to just put this nail in it, but as an artist manager and as somebody who's spent the past almost nearly a decade in digital rights management specifically, I have a lot of love for the people who can figure out compelling and valuable monetization models, right? If we can figure out a really productive way to allow people to enjoy and engage with content that really kind of maximizes the value potential for the creators and the rights owners, I think that's awesome. But you're right. There's an archaism to the way that the system is set up. There's an archaism to the processes that labels and publishers are going through with these new platforms to try and license them out, and really kind of just like it's inevitably one side gets shaken down, whether it's the rights owners or the platform, but somebody's getting the raw end. There's never really like a mutual benefit kind of conversation, and it ends up with something like Napster, where like they started at the beginning of like being public enemy number one, and now they're one of the first like significant major players to start to potentially fall off the map, because the system that they exist within, the protocols that are in place around rights licensing and content distribution are onerous and expensive and difficult and unfriendly. And I mean, frankly, yeah, there are way better options. I'm sure that Napster as a product definitely didn't keep up, but it almost seems like they could pivot if they felt like they had the ability. But it just, from what I've seen, and there's not a lot of information yet, but from what I've seen, it seems like there's just operational costs that they can't avoid, and that's really what's hamstringing them.
It's finding that balance between being able to pay the creators that are on that platform and balancing operations. So
yeah.
One of the themes so far today has been like the quarterly reports. If we want to take this over to the live sector, which it's been crippled, the Live Nation in their Q1 report saying they aren't seeing, Michael Rapino is saying that he didn't see a large demand for refunds,
which is surprising.
Yeah, and but you're hearing like there's furloughs, there's layoffs, and but what struck me about that 90% of fans, we don't have to discuss their numbers because we know everything is down, and even with that that buy-in from the Saudis, which we all should be paying attention to what's going on in that. But they're saying that the concerts have been rescheduled. Fans are opting to hold onto their tickets despite refunds being available. So what are your what's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'll kind of start anecdotally and then zoom out. I actually just yesterday had an artist who was supposed to be playing in Nashville in April. That obviously didn't happen. We knew that end of February, beginning of March, that it was likely going to get pushed as far down the road as possible. So we originally rescheduled April for mid-June, and that was supposed to coincide with a record release and a whole lot of other great things. And we just had a conversation with the promoter. Hey, that's not going to happen either. Do you want to cancel and we'll look for a new date, or do you want to take a new hold in the following quarter and then see what happens when we get there? And I said, look, we can cancel, but then we're cutting everybody adrift. We're kind of like basically saying, we don't know what's going to happen. Don't wait for us. Go find something else to do. Or we can say, we're committed to doing this. We're committed to having this experience with all of our fans, and give us a few more months, and we're going to try to do what we can to make this happen. So we're talking about what holds are available for September and October, for a concert that was supposed to be in April and then June. And I would much rather like repeatedly, ask the artist to go and say like, look, we're postponing again because we have to, but we're going to do this, and have that clarity of communication, as opposed to the unknown of just like, we're canceling. We don't know when we're going to do it, but at some point, just like stay tuned. It's like, nobody's staying tuned. There's too much going on. As for the overall concert business, I think a lot of people, the fact that very few people are pursuing refund options that are available. Number one, I just don't know that many people know that they have refund options available. They might think that they just don't. And secondly, especially for larger concerts where the tickets are $100, $200, even $300 for the right seats or more, depending, like that's a significant investment. They've already committed to doing that. There's a sort of a sunk cost involved, and they don't want the money back. They want that experience, and they want to make sure that if they, because if they get that refund, they don't know when they're going to get the chance to have that experience in their time, right?
It's almost holding on to the fact that we are going to be out there cheering and listening to live music, and that's kind of keep, on the psychological side, it's almost keeping hope.
Entirely. And I think that's super important. It's easy enough to look at that from like a fiscal, analysis perspective, but really it comes down to the psychology of keeping hope for what will eventually come around. Now, the thing that really frustrates me though, is that, of course, for anything that doesn't have a big pre-sale, like an arena concert where it's indefinitely on hold, but the tickets are still valid, things that are smaller concerts, shows that are definitely canceled, and the tickets are all refunded by default, like that's where the hits happen, right? That's where the revenue impact is for Live Nation. And when you have like a 20 to 25% drop in revenue, you got to have a 20 to 25% drop in cost, to kind of keep up with it. And we've seen every agency, shed staff. We've seen a lot of other, companies across the live sector, venues closing, Live Nation furloughing people. I'm hearing rumblings that there's going to be even more. I mean, we don't know what Live Nation is going to look like on the other side of this. We know they're holding on to a lot of the revenue that they already had. They've lost quarterly revenue, but there's still money in the bank. We know that they're trying to raise money. We know that Michael Rapino is going to give up some or all of his salary, but he's probably still going to be entitled to certain bonuses that are always like 2 or 3x his salary. And the people who are in charge of coordinating the concerts that are going to have to get rescheduled, well, if they're out the door, I just assume the worst, that we're going to come back from, back into a full concert season with a calendar that's to die for and nobody to really run it well. And only the people that are left are going to stand to benefit.